I did not know Canada had this many Indians, bro. Every Uber I get in is Indian. I went to the airport. It's scattered by Indians. Is this Canada? Canada or India, my nigga? Like, bro, it's literally like a million Indians in here, bro. Everywhere I go, I see an Indian, bro. It's actually crazy, gang. Is Canada close to India or some shit? Like, god damn.
All right, let's see here. This morning, I met a young man from India. He works at a local grocery store. Always curious as to what brings people to Alberta, I asked him. As it turns out, he saw the ad for the position at the local grocery store back in India.
Guys, let's be honest about something that is becoming impossible to ignore. When people talk about the demographic changes happening in Canada, it's not just statistics and policy papers anymore. It's what you see the moment you land at Pearson International Airport, or the moment you order an Uber, or even when you walk into a grocery store in Alberta. The conversation has shifted from quiet whispers about immigration to bold, almost frustrated declaration that Canada no longer feels like, Canada. It feels more like, in the words of many who have spoken on this, like you've landed in India.
Guys, when you land at Pearson's airport in Canada, you literally think you landed in New Delhi. Next time you land at Pearson's, pay attention. You'll realize that majority of the workers are Indian, right? It's like an 80-20 ratio. Like 80% of the workers at Pearson's airport, scanning your body and freaking doing all that stuff at the check-in and check-out are Indian. Not only that, the workers are Indian, but the whole airport demographic is Indian too. Genuinely pay attention. If you want an honest answer, I'd say for every 10 people, there's like 6 to 7 Indian people. So I don't know what's happening to this country, but it does not feel like you landed back in Canada. It literally feels like you landed somewhere in the middle of nowhere in India.
All right, let's see here. This morning, I met a young man from India. He works at a local grocery store. Always curious as to what brings people to Alberta, I asked him. As it turns out, he saw the ad for the position at the local grocery store back in India and applied for the job. They reached out and he completed the interview virtually. Within a short period of time, the company got all his paperwork together, arranged accommodation, and flew him here for the job. All for an entry-level position at a local grocery store here in Sherwood Park. Then, meanwhile, our youths born and raised here in Alberta are experiencing in the neighborhood of a 20% unemployment rate. Something is not right. Something is not right. This is mind-blowing. Like absolutely mind-blowing, and it is one of the highest forms of treason. And this has to stop. Canadians, white people, we need to wake the hell up and demand this to stop.
Unpopular opinion, but I think if you are someone that immigrated to Canada or any country, the only correct response is to conform. I think the word conform has some negative connotations, but if you think about it, you left your country for a reason and you picked Canada for a reason because it likely had things that your country lacked. So for you to now come and try to impose and bring in these changes because that is what you liked from your own country, just seems absurd to me. I feel like I can speak because I also immigrated here, and I don't know if it's a generational thing, but when I moved here, like the mentality was, head down, work hard, mind your own business, don't expect anything, don't ask for help, be grateful for everything. Whereas now, it's wild, and maybe my mentality was wrong and maybe I should have expected more and, demanded more. But it seems like so many newer immigrants now, it's very much the mentality of what can you do for me? And how will you respect my needs and wants? And how will you accommodate my culture and my religion and so on? And I don't know, I don't know if my mentality is just so backwards, but you have to conform.
Now, I want to set the tone very carefully here. This is not about blaming people from where they come from. This is about the visible, undeniable, rapid demographic shift that is shaping the identity of Canada in real time. For many long-time Canadians, and even, for established immigrants who, went there years ago, the country feels unfamiliar. They remember an, immigration mindset that said, keep your head down, work hard, don't expect special treatment, and be grateful. That was the old school immigrant mentality. But today, some say the mindset has changed. Instead of asking, how can I fit into Canada? There is now a growing perception that newer immigrants arriving are asking, how will Canada fit into me? How will Canada respect my culture, my religion, my expectations? This cultural tension is creating a divide, not just between Canadians and newcomers, but even between older immigrants generations and newer ones. And then there is the employment piece. Here's where emotions really run high. Imagine you are a young Canadian in Alberta. You've grown up there, you've gone to school there, and yet youth unemployment in some parts hover around 20% in the exact same time. Companies are recruiting every level workers directly from India, flying them over, setting up their paperwork, housing them, and giving them jobs that locals say they could have done. It feels to many like an economic betrayal. One voice even went as far as to call one of the highest forms of treason, and that Canadians, especially white Canadians, need to wake up and stop this. Now, whether you agree or not with the language, you cannot ignore the emotional weight behind that statement. It reflects a deep concern that Canada's immigration system, instead of protecting opportunities from its own citizens, is bending over backwards to accommodate international labor pipelines. It makes people ask whose interests are really being prioritized. And all of this leads to the emotional punch of the discussion, the sense of displacement. Imagine stepping off a plane in Toronto and saying, this doesn't feel like Canada. Imagine walking into an airport and estimating that 8 out of 10 workers you see are Indian. Imagine ordering an Uber and feeling like every driver you get is from the same country. For some, this is a celebration of diversity. For others, it feels like a complete erasure of the Canada they once knew. So here's the question I want us to wrestle with in this reaction. Are these changes simply the natural outcome of globalization and Canada's immigration policy, or are they creating a Canada that no longer feels like Canada to those who, live there? And more importantly, what does it mean for integration, identity, and the future of Canadian youth? That's the foundation of this conversation, guys, and trust me, it only gets more complex as we move into it. Now, before we jump to the next part, guys, I want to play a few clips here. Then on the comments, let me know what your thoughts are. Now, let's zoom in on the core conflict. On the side, you have companies and industries that say they need immigrant labor. They argue that young Canadians don't want these jobs, or that the labor shortages are so severe that bringing in workers from abroad is the only solution. That is why a grocery store in Alberta can advertise in India, recruit a young man, fly him over and handle his paperwork, and put him in a job that, at least on the surface, seems perfectly doable for someone already living in Alberta. But then on the other side, you have locals who are watching unemployment numbers skyrocket, particularly among the youth, and they are asking, why are we outsourcing opportunity? Why are we skipping over the people who are already here, who are struggling to make ends meet, who are desperately, need these entry-level jobs? For them, the situation is not just frustrating, it feels fundamentally unjust. Now, let's connect this with the cultural identity piece. Immigration is not just about labor, it's about people, values, and assimilation. An establishment immigrant said it bluntly. The correct response is to conform. If you leave your home country, you leave for a reason. You choose Canada because it offered what your own country could not. So why try to recreate your home country inside of Canada? Why insist on Canada accommodating every single aspect of your culture and religion instead of adapting yourself to the culture you choose to join? That is the tough love perspective. But today, many newcomers seem to have a different approach. They arrive expecting recognition, accommodation, and even structural adjustments to make sure their culture is centered. That shift in mentality is what has created this generational immigrant divide. Older immigrants shaking their heads, newer immigrants pushing back, and Canadians in the middle saying, "What happened to our country?" And then there is the daily experience. Demographics don't just live in census reports. They live in airports, grocery stores, ride-sharing apps, and public services. That is why you hear people saying things like, "Every Uber I get in is in India," or Pearson Airport feels like New Delhi. These aren't statistical debates. These are visceral experiences of identity. When people repeatedly encounter one dominant group in all these public-facing roles, the narrative of Canada as a multicultural mosaic starts to feel less like a mosaic and more like a takeover. Now, of course, there's another side to this. Some Canadians embrace the diversity and celebrate it. They argue that seeing so many Indians in visible roles is proof of Canada's inclusivity, proof of its ability to attract talent, proof that the country is thriving as a global destination. They argue that what some call a loss of identity is actually the natural evolution of a multicultural nation. But here's the uncomfortable truth, guys. Identity is not just about abstract. It's about how people feel. And right now, a lot of people are feeling like Canada is slipping away. So where does that leave us? In the final part. So where does that leave us? Well, let's pull everything, together and really dig into the heart of the matter. The idea that Canada is becoming, in the words of some frustrated voices, an Indian enclave, that phrase is heavy. It's not neutral. It creates the weight of cultural anxiety, economic frustration, and identity crisis, but it also forces us to examine Canada's future head-on. Think about this. Canada is a country built on immigration, right? That is undeniable. For decades, it has prided itself on diversity, on welcoming newcomers, on creating a society where multicultures can coexist. But coexistence is different from dominance. And what people are negotiating now is not just diversity. It's consent relation. The overwhelming visibility of one community in certain sectors has tipped the balance. When 80% of airport staff appear to be from one group, when ride sharing feels monopolized by one demographic, when even entry-level jobs are filled by people flown in from overseas, it doesn't look like balance anymore. It looks like replacement. And replacement, whether you call it demographic shift, cultural displacement, or economic outsourcing, stirs fear. It makes people feel like they are losing control over their own country. For native-born Canadians, it triggers the question, what happened to their country? For establishment immigrants, it triggers frustration. Why aren't newcomers adopting the mindset we had? Why aren't they grateful, humble, and focused on blending in? This is where the idea of assimilation becomes crucial, because let's be real, no society can function without some baseline of shared values, shared culture, shared identity. If everyone is pulling in different directions, demanding recognition, demanding, accommodation, demanding cultural priority, then the, common thread of national identity phrase. And right now, that thread in Canada feels strained. Economically, the tension is just sharp. Youth unemployment at 20% in Alberta is not a small statistic. It's a crisis, and when young Canadians see companies bypassing them to import workers, it feels like betrayal. It feels like they are being told, you don't matter. Your struggle doesn't matter. We would rather go thousands of miles away and bring someone else here than invest in you. That is why words like treason are being thrown around. That is why the anger is so visceral. Now, let's be fair. From the employer's perspective, international recruitment makes sense. Workers from abroad may, accept low wages, work long hours, and come with fewer demands. For companies, it's cheaper and easier. But here's the question Canada has to face. Is saving a few dollars worth sacrificing the social fabric of your own nation? Is it worth alienating your own citizens? Because once people start feeling like outsiders in their own country, the demand is not just economic, it's emotional, cultural, and generational. And here's where the perception becomes dangerous. Once people start saying this doesn't feel like Canada anymore, you risk creating resentment, not just against policies, but against people, against entire communities. That is how multiculturalism fractures. That is how neighbors become divided. That is how diversity turns into division. But here's the bigger challenge. Immigration isn't slowing down. Canada has set ambitious targets for bringing in more immigrants every year, and India is consistently one of the top sources. So the demographic shift will continue. The visibility will continue. The question is, will integration keep up, or will Canada sleepwalk into a situation where certain communities dominate entire industries, entire neighborhoods, entire narratives, leaving others feeling erased? And let's not forget the international dimension. For many Indians, Canada is marketed as the land of opportunity. Recruitment agencies and even companies themselves paint a picture of guaranteed jobs, smooth pathways, and a better life. And for many, that is true. They arrive, they work, they build, they thrive. But the flip side is that Canadian youth, Canadian workers, and Canadian taxpayers start to feel like their own country is prioritizing outsiders over insiders. That resentment is political dynamite. So what happens next if nothing changes? We are looking at a future where the phrase Canadian identity becomes, contested territory. On one side, a group will say identity is evolving, it's diverse, it's global. On the other side, people will say identity has been stolen, replaced, hollowed out. Both groups will be shouting across a widening gap. And here's the truth. No country can survive that kind of division for long. So what needs to happen? First, honesty. Canadians need to admit what they are seeing. Pretending that everything is fine, that everyone feels comfortable, is not working. The perception of Canada as an Indian enclave is not just racist rhetoric, it's a reflection of lived experience. Ignoring it doesn't make it go away. Second, balance. Immigration must balance the needs of the economy with the rights of citizens. If Canadian youth are unemployed at high rates, why are companies allowed to import labor? If diversity is the goal, why is one community so disproportionately represented in certain industries? These are not questions of hate, they are questions of fairness. And third, integration. If newcomers want to be part of Canada, then yes, assimilation matters. Respect the host country, respect its culture, its people, its way of life. Don't arrive asking what Canada can do for you. Arrive asking how can you contribute, because that's what keeps the social fabric intact. In the end, this is bigger than just than Uber drivers, airport workers, or grocery store employees. This is about what it means to belong to a country. This is about whether Canadians, both native born and immigrant, still feel like they are living in Canada, or whether they feel like strangers in a place that was once their home. And if Canada doesn't face this head on, the risk is clear, not just as an Indian enclave, but a fractured nation, divided by resentment, struggling to remember who it really is. That is the conversation Canada cannot afford to ignore. Guys, as usual, drop a comment, let me know what your thoughts are. Also remember to subscribe, like and share as well. And until next time, bye bye.